In this presentation, we will review Stage 1 in the Understanding by Design process. So at this point, we'll be referring to the UbD template, so please go into Pilot, print out the UbD Word template so you can refer to it throughout the entire presentation. During the first stage of UbD, designers consider the desired results of the unit being developed. You will begin with the "and" in mind. So take out the UbD template and refer to the portion where you identify the course unit information and the competencies section of the form. The word competence can be defined as the ability of a person to do a job properly. Competencies are what people need to do a job successfully. Competencies are not the same as job tasks, as they include all the knowledge, skills, attributes, and attitudes a person needs to do a job properly. Organizations can use competencies to develop training that's needed for specific jobs. Competencies are important in higher ed, however, because it's important that students have these competencies to ensure they can get a job and then succeed at the job. Let's talk about the use of competencies in the K through 12 environment. The Common Core standards are only for English arts literacy and math. There are 43 states that have voluntarily adopted the Common Core standards. So competencies for the K through 12 environment can be found on the Ohio Department of Education's website, and they have most subjects and also most grade levels. So if you are creating a UbD unit for the K through 12 public school environment, these are the competencies that you will most likely be using. Now let's talk about competencies in higher education. Most of the professional schools, such as engineering, nursing, medicine, and education, are very familiar with competencies and standards provided by their professional organizations. Some departments in higher education, however, have little familiarity with the use of competencies and standards. Higher education is rapidly moving toward the use of competencies in education, and many departments, however, need to show proof that their students have mastered the competencies identified by their professional organization to pass accreditation reviews. Now let's talk about competencies in the corporate world. Corporations are now developing competencies for jobs to have help in identifying skills to hire the right person for the right job, and also to ensure that they're developing training that will help with the competencies for each job. So while the use of competencies in the corporate world is new, it's growing in leaps and bounds. Corporate training departments are using these to develop the right types of training. Finding competencies for specific job skills in the corporate world may be a little bit of a challenge. Books that include job competencies are usually pricey, and they're usually bought as reference books for the department. For example, in this book, World-Class Selling New Sales Competencies, it's an excellent book that has competencies for sales reps. However, the book is pricey. It lists at $299 from Amazon. So one of my students was at LexisNexis, and she needed competencies for sales rep training. So she looked around the office and she found they had a copy to use for competency identification. When you fill out Stage 1 for course approval, you needed to identify the professional organization that provides competencies for your specific organization and discipline. Then in Stage 1, you'll actually need to provide the competencies or standards you'll be using. So you only need to list the competencies that will apply to your lesson. So take out your UbD template and now refer to the transfer section. Learning transfer can be defined on how individuals transfer learning from one context to another. Near learning transfer would be defined when students transfer learning to environments that are very similar to the context in which they learned the information. Far learning transfer would be when students have the ability to transfer learning to environments that are very different from the environment in which they learned it. Getting students to be able to transfer learning to environments that are very dissimilar to their learning environment is beneficial because it allows students to be able to transfer learning to their work environment. Here's a learning transfer example from the goals of taking driver's education. What do you think that a student's goal for taking driver's education is? Well, most students really just take driver's education to be able to pass the driver's exam. So, most students' goal is just to get their driver's license. So simply passing a driver's test is probably not an effective long-term learning transfer goal. So what do you think the part-time instructor's goal of the class is? So many part-time instructors' goals when they're hired for driver's education class is just simply to get the majority of the students to successfully complete the driver's education curriculum. So simply completing the class is not a good long-term goal either. Isn't the transfer goal of driver's education really to teach students to be safe drivers in live situations? If this was the goal, you'd probably want to design your class to require students to have lots of driving experience in lots of different environments. So you'll need to provide the learning transfer goals for your unit in your UbD template. Label each transfer goal with T1, T stands for T1, T2, T3, and list each transfer goal. Be sure to align each transfer goal with a competency it matches so you can reuse competencies if needed. So take your template out and please refer to the meaning section. Meaning making is the part of the learning process where students take all the knowledge and all the skills they're learning in your class and they begin to put them together to make sense and have those aha moments where they begin to develop deep levels of understanding. In your UbD template, your meaning section will require you to provide essential questions, Q, and understandings, U. The big idea answers students when they ask questions such as, why are we learning this? The big idea tells them why it's important. An essential question is usually open-ended and does not have a simple right answer. It should be something that is meant to be investigated, argued, looked at from different points of view. Essential questions should provoke deep thought, lively discussion, sustained inquiry, and may even cause controversy. Essential questions are always written in the form of a question. Once you decide on the essential question or big ideas for your class, you then have to figure out what understandings will the students need to know in order to be able to have deep levels of understandings to be able to answer those essential questions. The understanding items should also include any known misunderstandings that instructors can predict that students will realize when they're learning this content. So let's provide a meaning-making example. In this example, the essential question is, do you think that genetic engineering should be used in farming? It's a good essential question because it's provocative, it fosters inquiry, it makes students want to learn, there's no right or wrong answer, and it sparks controversy. In this example, the essential question, do you think genetic engineering should be used in farming? As an instructor, you then need to determine what it is for students they need to understand to be able to answer this question. And so in this case, it would be understandings in ethical ramification and also genetics. When you fill out your UbD template with the meaning-making information, you will add the essential questions and the understandings. Be sure to list the essential questions in a question format. You will use a code to identify each essential question with a Q1, Q2, Q3. You will also include the competency code that aligns with the essential question. Then list the understandings that students will need to be able to deeply understand and answer the essential questions. The understandings will be listed as a statement that starts with "Students will understand that," and then complete. Label the understandings with a U and numbers such as U1, U2, or U3. You will also include the competency codes that align with each understandings. There does not, and probably should not, have the same number of essential questions and understandings because each essential question may have several understandings that students will need to understand in order to be able to answer that essential question. So please take out your UbD template form and refer to the acquisition section. Let's talk about the acquisition part of the UbD document. In the UbD template, you will need to identify the declarative knowledge and procedural skills students will need to know by the end of the unit to be able to answer the essential question. Examples of declarative knowledge would be multiplication, and an example of a procedural skill would be how to use a specific calculator. Sometimes in higher education, they have not always included skill-based learning and focused primarily on conceptual understanding. Employers are now pushing back and asking higher education to update their curriculum to include skills necessary for employment. Examples of skills to be included might be learning how to administer real-time polling instead of having students simply use a clicker to respond to questions. Another example is how to develop PowerPoint slides that utilize the beyond bullet point design to minimize cognitive load. A final example would be to teach students how to use RefWorks to give them more productivity in academic research. When you fill out your UbD template with the acquisition information, you will add the knowledge and the skills, and you will use a code to identify each knowledge item with a K and numbers such as K1, K2, K3, and you will also include any competency codes that align with the knowledge items. Then list the skills that students would need to know to deeply understand and answer the essential questions. So label the skills with an S and number them with S1, S2, or S3, etc. And you will also include the competency codes that align with each skill, and there does not and probably should not have the same number of knowledge items and skills.